All right. Welcome everyone. We're just going to wait about a couple of minutes just to make sure everyone is able to join the session before we officially kick it off. So let folks trickle in. Great. Okay, yeah, we still have folks joining, so we'll just wait a couple more minutes. We'll probably officially get started definitely by 7:05. Make sure no one misses the introductions. Hope everyone's Tuesday is off to a good start, winding up, winding down. And for everyone who is joining us, I suggest in your Zoom, changing your view to the speaker view so that you'll be able to see the presenter alongside the presentation that will be shown as well. Okay. All right. Well, I think we're about ready to get started. So I want to say welcome, everyone. I am Jill Harvey, the president of the Mystic Valley NAACP area. And I just want to welcome you to this program. I'm really excited that our Reparations Committee is putting this on and that we've got quite the audience tonight. So, and a great panel lined up as well. So I had said earlier, if you want to make sure that your Zoom mode is on speaker view, you'll be able to see the presentation and the person who's speaking as well. But before we get started, I just did want to also go over some ground rules for this conversation. So this will be kind of a heavy topic. Reparations are a lot. You'll learn more, but I invite everyone to listen actively, be open about what you're hearing, listen to understand, don't listen to respond. Also try and participate to your fullest. So that means, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or at the end, we have a Q&A where we'll invite you, if you'd like, to continue to put those questions in the chat or use the raise hand button, which is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Lean into discomfort. That's a really great rule that I try to live by every day in the work that I do, which is, it's hard. Talking about history, and especially history that isn't really highlighted and that we're all sort of on our own journeys figuring out, can be really uncomfortable. but leaning into that discomfort will only make it easier for you to reflect and recognize the continued learning that needs to happen. Please use I statements. That I think is self-explanatory. You try not to speak for other people. Speak your truth in ways that respect others' truths. So again, that kind of goes back to those I statements. We know that sometimes impact or intent doesn't always equal impact. So really just be cautious about how you phrase questions or statements. Expect and accept a lack of closure. So again, this topic is difficult and it's not gonna end. Really, this is probably the beginning. This is the first time that our branch is hosting a conversation like this. We did have the book talk a couple of years ago now, but now we're bringing in some other voices and hearing how reparations is really taking flight kind of in the area. But you can also expect that you're not going to have, you know, the next thing to do and that we're going to have reparations tomorrow. So this type of work, it takes time. And the last rule that I always try to practice and encourage others to is to take care of yourself and take deep breaths. Any racial equity work is really difficult and it lays heavy. So I suggest after this program, you know, maybe watch a funny show or have a glass of wine, whatever your heart desires, but be sure to take care of yourself. And so those are some of the ground rules that I wanted to share with you all. In addition to that, we just do ask that you keep the chat respectful, and we really won't tolerate any type of language or statements or comments that are not respectful. And so we've got folks who are monitoring the Zoom, monitoring the chat. And if there is an issue, we will remove you because we are just not going to tolerate it. So just remember that. And like I said, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We will be doing Q&A after all of the presentations. And so I'll be keeping track of those questions, but also will be asking folks if they want to raise their hand to do so as well. Let's see, I think we're on track to get started right on time. So before we do that, I'm just going to launch 2 poll questions to see where we're at in terms of reparations. And so can you all see these questions? Okay, feel free to answer them. And I'll give you about a minute or maybe 30 seconds. I'll suss it out.
Oh, shoot.
Ooh, okay, just kidding. Oh. Did the poll end? Are folks still able to use the poll?
Mine ended.
It ended? Okay. Feel like, let me see. Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment. If you didn't get the opportunity to do it, I'm actually going to relaunch it. So we can try again, take 2, and see if we can get all of our audience members to be able to participate this time. Okay, I see them racking in. Okay. All right. So can you all see the results of the poll? No. Okay, let's see. So you should be able to see them now. So it looks like with the first question, how familiar are you with the subject of reparations? We didn't have anyone who's not familiar at all, which is pretty solid. 54% of folks have some knowledge but would like to learn more. 43% of the audience today has pretty good understanding, and 3% of our folks would call themselves experts. And then the second question was, how comfortable are you with the idea of reparations? And I think this goes back to that leaning into discomfort. 0 of our attendees are uncomfortable. 3% are somewhat uncomfortable. 20% are a little unsure. 57% are comfortable, and 20% are very comfortable. So that's where we're all kind of standing. So I'll be interested to see what our comfort levels are after this presentation. So I'm going to close that poll, and I'm going to get started with our next set of presenters. Let's see. So up first, we have Urga and Jennifer, who are 2 of our reparations committee members with the Mystic Valley area NAACP branch. So I will toss it over to them to get us started with grounding us in reparations.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Urga, and we're going to just get started. Reparations for what? The case for reparations. The case I make for reparations is virtually every institution with some degree of history in America, be it public, be it private, has a history of extracting wealth and resources out of the African American community. 2019. 250 years of slavery, 90 years of Jim Crow, 60 years of separate but equal, 35 years of racist housing policies. Until we reckon with our compounding moral debt, America will never be whole. 2014, Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Do we have the next slide?
Next slide.
So lest we think that slavery in the United States was long, long ago, or a relatively short period in our history, Byron Rushing reminds us that, and I quote, "It will only be in the year 2111 that people of African descent in America will have been free for as long as they were enslaved." And that is America, stand in for the United States. Next slide.
What are reparations?
Wait,
a program of acknowledgements, redress, and closure for grievous injustice, including slavery, legal segregation, Jim Crow, and ongoing discrimination and stigmatization.
And that comes from the book, From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. Next slide. There's a long history of reparations, and some examples of reparations to other groups include Germany, which paid reparations to victims of the Holocaust, with additional payments to those who were used as slave or forced labor in some of Germany's major industries. Canada also paid reparations They paid reparations to First Nations people for loss of language and culture caused by residential schools, where children were taken from their families and forced into schools, boarding schools. And the United States has already paid reparations to Japanese Americans and issued a formal apology, which was issued by President Reagan, for their incarceration during World War II. So there is a solid history of reparations. Next slide.
There are three major debates about reparations. Who is owed reparations? Who should pay reparations? And what forms should reparations take? Next slide. Now, what does all of this have to do with Massachusetts? Two facts. Slavery was legal in Massachusetts from 1641 to 1783. In Boston, in 2015, the average Black household wealth was $8. The average of white household wealth was $247,500. What does the first fact have to do with the second? Next slide.
We want to leave you with that question before we go on to the next presentation. That's the next presentation.
Great, thank you. So we got some grounding from Jennifer and Erga, and now I'm going to ask Patty to unmute, who is also a member of the Reparations Committee.
Okay, I think I've managed to unmute myself, but I'm not showing on the screen. Is that okay? Can you hear me, Jill?
Yes, you are ready to go.
All right. Anyway, I'm going to start reading. In 1634, Reverend Zacharias Sims sailed with his family from England to Boston. He was admitted to the church at Charlestown and hired as their teaching elder less than 3 months after he arrived. 4 years later, the town of Charlestown granted 300 acres to Reverend Zacharias Sims, 280 acres of which were eventually incorporated as Winchester, Massachusetts. In the same year of 1638, a slave ship brought Boston's first shipment of enslaved Africans from Barbados, who were being exchanged for Pequod Indian prisoners. The Mass Bay colony had already become the first slaveholding colony in New England when 2 enslaved people were brought to Boston by their owner in 1624. Governor John Winthrop, a slave owner himself, helped write the first law legalizing slavery in North America, called the Massachusetts Bodies of Liberty, which was passed in 1641. So now you can see a slide that is this quote I'm going to read, I believe. It's from the Massachusetts Historical Society website, which clearly places the beginnings of the triangle trade in Boston. In 1644, Boston merchants began importing slaves directly from Africa, selling them in the West Indies and bringing home sugar to make rum, initiating the so-called triangular trade. From 1672 to 1696, the British Parliament granted the Royal African Company a monopoly on the slave trade. Yankee slavers avoided the monopoly by smuggling slaves in through small coastal harbors. In 1696, the British Parliament revoked the monopoly held by the Royal African Company, enabling Massachusetts merchants and shipmasters to engage freely in the slave trade. As I understand it, that is exactly what they did for nearly 100 years, until slavery was consistently seen in the courts as inconsistent with the Massachusetts Constitution, which was ratified in 1781. Please show the second slide now so people can look at the main sea routes of the triangle trade while I finish with my presentation. According to Ronald Pendon, author of, quote, Notes on the State of America, the first efforts to manufacture cotton in New England were made in small factories at Beverly and Bridgewater, Massachusetts in 1787. The cotton gin was invented in 1794, and the rush was on to increase plantation production across the South. At the same time, New England was engaging in a similar rush to build manufacturing facilities, which led to the region's enormous industrial cotton textiles economy. Pendant concludes, the fact is, industrialization did happen on the backs of Black slavery. He also writes of the myth maintained by well-off whites, quote, "We have more money, therefore we must be more virtuous," end quote. He explains that this myth lives on and contributes to the ongoing suppression of the real history, thereby ensuring the, quote, "culture of white supremacy reigns first, last, and always," end quote. Put more simply, Leah Penniman, author of Farming While Black, writes, quote, "The current food system was built on the labor of 12.5 million skilled African farmers. That forced labor performed on stolen land became the basis for the wealth of this nation. I believe the wealth found in the town of Winchester is no exception. Reverend Zachariah Sims never lived in the area, but his sons did. Over the years, their property included a clothing mill on the Aberjono River, a blacksmith shop, houses, one still standing from 1817, and a carriage building business. By 1840, a village had developed, including a church and a tavern. After a remarkable amount of lobbying against the measure in the Massachusetts state legislature, a bill establishing the town of Winchester was passed in 1850. The town was named after Lieutenant Colonel William Parsons Winchester, who gave $3,000 toward building the town hall. He had been instrumental in building his family's profitable meatpacking business into a wholesale merchant company, becoming one of the wealthiest men in Boston before his untimely death from typhoid fever at the age of 49. Now, my question to all of you this evening is, how can we learn from the stories of the folks that settled our New England towns and cities? Like our predecessors, we may have the best of intentions and simply be a product of our culture and our times. But I wonder what else we could be doing to make things fairer now, to acknowledge a much fuller history and begin to think seriously about some ways of finding meaningful and long-lasting repair. I just heard Isabel Wilkerson, author of Caste, talk about the need for everyone to intervene within their own, quote, sphere of influence, end quote. Is it really that hard to think every day about the small things that we could be doing differently? Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Patty. Okay. Next, I want to introduce our next panelist, Sean Osborne, who is a civil engineering consultant, Air Force veteran, and public historian. In 2017, he co-founded the Association of Black Citizens of Lexington, also known as ABCL. While serving as the founding president, he created the Black History Project of Lexington. In 2022, Mr. Osborne became ABCL historian. He serves as a veterans mediation and training active bystanders trainer for Quabbin Mediation and is on the board of the Lexington Historical Society. In 2021, he was recognized as a Black Excellence on the Hill honoree by the Massachusetts Black and Latino Legislative Caucus. Mr. Osborne started the successful campaign to create Massachusetts Emancipation Day with letters to the editor, which were printed in the Boston Herald and Lexington Minuteman in June of 2020. An act designating July 8th as Massachusetts Emancipation Day, also known as Quack Walker Day, was signed by then Governor Baker on November 1st, 2022. So I would like to invite Sean to unmute and let me know when you want me to hit next.
Thanks, Jill. I appreciate it. Thanks to you and to the chapter and to the committee for inviting me to be part of this panel. It's important for us to talk about reparations, and as part of that, the fable of racial superiority of white people that was the foundation of chattel slavery in our country, and that cancer of anti-Blackness continues to metastasize. And so when you ask that question of when and why and how, I think it's important for us to remember that foundation, and as was mentioned in earlier slides, how it metastasized into other ways of being. Over the next 10 minutes, I I will talk about how reparations is tied into anti-Black housing discrimination, and how we need to combat that, and the legacy of slavery that continues to this day. Next slide, please. So one of the questions that was asked earlier is, who was owed reparations? So my argument is two parts. One, the descendants of Black people who were enslaved in the United States. That includes the former colonies and territories, which are now part of the nation, because there were people who were enslaved in the 1600s, were emancipated, and they were emancipated, and some of them bought houses in Lexington, the Burdews, in the early 1700s, but that didn't mean that they didn't face discrimination, and that their children didn't, and their grandchildren did not. And so I think it's important to have them in that pool of folks who were owed reparations. And then let's talk about the 20th century and the explosion of the middle class in America. Black veterans were not part of that. And I think it's important that those veterans and their children and their spouses are also part of the reparations equation. And you see the dates there. Next slide. So one of the things that, you know, I love history, as Jill noted in my intro, thank you, Jill, is that it's important to see how history, continues. We have a quote here from Theodore Parker, a noted abolitionist and Lexingtonian, who, while he was an abolitionist, that did not mean that he was also not a white supremacist, that he was not also a racist. That he says, when slavery is abolished, the African population will decline in the United States and die out of the South as out of Northampton and Lexington. So what he's saying in this letter to Sarah Hunt is that, yes, slavery ended in Massachusetts in 1783, and that was great because my Black neighbors left. And everybody should want slavery to lead to go to end in America so that their Black neighbors can also leave, whether those Black neighbors are indentured, enslaved, or free. They should be gone. And then you see that same theme 100 and so years later, when you look at the report that was written in January 75 of 20th century about Route 128, that said that the new housing, jobs, and schools and amenities of suburban life which followed the completion of Route 128 were for whites only. Right? There's that continuation, and that's why the theme of this program. My presentation anyway. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the Burdews. So the Burdews, were married in Medford, came to Lexington, purchased their house in early 1700s. There's one of their sons fought in the French and Indian War. Two of their grandchildren fought in the Revolutionary War. And many of their, the male Burdews are listed as taxpayers because that's what you are in the roles. You're a taxpayer or not a taxpayer. If you're not a taxpayer, that means you're not of age, you're enslaved, or you're indentured, right? You're not of age and you're white, you're enslaved and you're Black, or you're indentured and you're white or you're Black, right? So the Burdews are shown as taxpayers, but and in the 1760s, there are 20 Black people in the records. Now, the records of 20 Black people in the 60s, that number are those folks who want to acknowledge that they had enslaved people and pay those taxes. Those people that had enslaved people who were a certain age. And so that 20 may be an under count. but what's important here is that you have this Job and Violet. They become known as Job Locke and Violet Monroe. And they're married and they're enslaved in 1767. And you see those names in a few more slides. Next slide. So remember, we're on the cusp of the Civil War. You had an abolitionist say, it'd be great when there's no more Black folks. And the reason why he said that was because in Lexington, you had 20 people in the 1760s. By 1860, there was one Black person in the entire town. And that's what that number starts. You see here in 1790, you had, you said 20 people when you had slavery, 20 people when you had slavery. In the 60s, 1790, you have 8, see the decrease. That's what he was all happy about. And then come 1860, there's 1. The population triples, and there's 1 Black person. Next slide. So what I love about, going back to this quote again from Theodore Parker, is that he's a transcendentalist, he's an abolitionist, and he's also a white supremacist. And so I want us all to think about that when we talk about what does it mean to be an ally. It is important when you talk about being an ally or being allied with someone, that we understand that all of us come in with multiple goals. You've heard from my bio that I have a bias towards Black people and veterans, right? So all of us come in with wanting, certain groups to get certain things and having access to resources. And so we talk about reparations, it's how do we even that playing field so that Black people who didn't have access to handing out resources have access to doing so. Next slide, please. So 19th century, you have Parker and those like him, helping warning Black people out of Lexington, helping them no longer be in town. And then you have in the 20th century, you have this huge growth, according to Lexington Town website, especially at the end of World War II. You see from in the 1940s, we have population of 13,000 in Lexington, then 17,000 10 years later, then 27,000 10 years later, and then 31,000 10 years after that. You have this huge growth. Remember what that slide said about Route 128? It's huge growth in suburbia, in greater Boston. In many places was for whites only. Next slide. So we remember the New Deal, 1930s, the New Deals. And we started having this affordable mortgage from the government support, mainly for white people. And you see that redlining starts in the 30s with the New Deal. Next slide. Here's the red line of the map of Lexington, right? So here you have this wonderful map of my adopted town. And what I love is that if you're looking for it, by the way, it's the residential security map dated February 1st of 1938. And you can find it under mapping inequality as part of Richmond. Now, University of Richmond. What I found interesting is that one of the highlighted sections here, you can see the yellow, and the one beneath it is also yellow. That's in Lexington, that was the weakest area. And those are the areas where the Route 128, please mute, please. Thank you. So those are the areas where the Route 128 interchanges are. Right. So what you think is going to happen is what happens. What I also thought was important for us to remember about redlining is that the folks were paid for by the federal government, and that and they were following the standards, and the standards was to adhere to the National Ethics Code to maintain segregation. Negroes, Italians, other immigrants, it's all part of the code. These were not by accident. So anything that we do to repair this also cannot be by accident. It happens. We have to be explicit because the harm was explicit. Next slide, please. The 40s, the 50s, the ways of segregation in housing continues, and then you get to the 60s, and we think, isn't this great? We have the Fair Housing Act, but the Fair Housing Act has never been fully enforced, and to that end, you see in the next slide, that even in 2017 in Massachusetts, you see that Black homeowners were 7 times more likely to buy in Randolph, 5 times more likely to buy in Brockton, not because they couldn't afford to buy elsewhere, but because that's where the realtors and the lenders were sending them. And so when you look at the communities, what you'll see if you look at the report, which I invite you all to do, they call the communities of opportunity. More green space, better schools, that it is those communities where African Americans and Latinos were systematically and continue to be systematically excluded. Because again, we don't enforce the Fair Housing Act. Next slide. So what does it look like in my fair town of Lexington? What that means is that we had a little under 1% of the population was Black in 1790. In case you missed that, in 1790, we were a little under 1%. And in 2020, we were slightly above 1%. That is not by accident. You look to the right, you see that 9.3% of Massachusetts is Black. Why wouldn't Black folks want to buy in Lexington? Especially in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and 80s, when it was much more affordable than it is now. Why wouldn't those Black folks want to have that lovely equity that would help their children and their grandchildren and themselves in retirement, right? And so this is why you come to the next slide. This is for me, this is the important takeaway is reparations is home ownership. Home ownership is wealth, because that is the largest source of wealth among families. You look at the, reference back to the earlier slides, and you look at the disparity in wealth in the greater Boston area, and you look at the systemic exclusion of Black people from communities with high opportunity, and you see that that's part of the reasons why we had that wealth gap. especially when you see that that's where most people in America get their wealth, Black, white, or indifferent, is from home ownership and that equity. So when you buy a house and you own that house, but it doesn't increase in value at a high rate, then your wealth is not does not grow, or doesn't occur at all. You own a house, which is great. I mean, yeah, that's but it's a different conversation. Next slide, please. So what is it looking like? So just 3 parts, because I know I only had 10 minutes. For Black veterans, that means that while Black veterans only make up 12.3% of the general population, 33% of all veterans who experience homelessness are African American. They don't have that fallback, either on the wealth side or the housing side. You look at Black student loans. We talk about student loans a lot in the last few years. Over 2/3 of Black students borrow money to pay for community college, compared to 51% of white students, 36% of Hispanic students, and 30% of Asian students. You're borrowing because you can't borrow from your equity. Your friends doesn't have the equity in their house to borrow from, in addition to not having the income to borrow from. But staying here on the housing side, there are the equity to tap into to keep them from having those loans. And that's not just me saying that. That's what the Federal Reserve Bank says as well, right? This is the understanding of why it's important to have not just more Black home ownership, but to have more Black home ownership in high opportunity communities. And that leads into the last one, which is the lack of enforcement of the Fair Housing Act. Those of you who know the Fair Housing Act has a myriad of protected classes. Unfortunately, those classes are not protected, whether you have children, or you're disabled, or you're a veteran, or your protected class of race or ethnicity. You are not protected either as a renter or a buyer. Next slide. So what do you do? So first thing to do is increasing the supply of affordable housing for veterans. In Lexington, we talked about affordable housing. What our numbers show is that the affordable housing in Lexington is 40+% Asian, 40+% white. And so you're not going to correct reparations through affordable housing. I think you're going to have a better opportunity to correct reparations through affordable housing when you target it towards veterans. Many of you know from the agricultural department that you cannot say that those affordable housing is for Black veterans, because you'll lose in the courts. But you saw the numbers where 1/3 of the homeless Black veterans are Black. That's a good chance then that you're going to provide housing to them. Waive tuition for Black master's residents who attend state universities and schools, as well as community colleges. This program is similar to a program that currently exists for the Native Americans, through the Native American Tuition Credit. That's administered through the Massachusetts Commission on Indian Affairs. And it's open to Native Americans who live in Massachusetts, as well as others from the United States. So my recommendation is that we extend that credit to Black students, and you saw who I thought would be eligible for that. What can you do as an organization? What can you do as an individual? Pay the discount points to reduce the mortgage interest rate by 1% for Black folks buying their primary home. You reduce the monthly payment. I had a colleague who talked about a friend of his felt so bad when he understood how disparate his experience was as a second generation white immigrant in America, that he went back to some of his colleagues who worked with him early on in his life, and he just sent them checks. So he said, "Hi, this is me. I feel bad. This is what I'm doing." He sent them checks. So, those of us on this call who want to do reparations, that's one thing you can do. You can also set up systems in your community or in the state where they will pay those points. And the last one is that this is currently going through the State House, an act to establish an Office of Fair Housing and Fair Housing Trust Fund. There are currently 4 organizations for fair housing in the state. One covers Suffolk County, one covers the Southeast, one covers Central Mass, and one covers Western Mass. There is nothing for Greater Boston. That high opportunity communities, there's nothing for Greater Boston. So if you want to carry out testing and enforcement activities in Greater Boston, good luck. If you want to provide education on the Fair Housing Act in Greater Boston area, again, good luck. And what this act does is provides funding so that we as a collective or as individuals can create a fair housing organization like the Greater Boston Fair Housing Organization that shut down a few years ago for lack of funding. That you're getting the funding from the state, which is where it always should have been, to support the federal law from 1968, the Fair Housing Act. So those are recommendations for reparations. Next slide, please. To follow up or to get a copy of the slide, you can contact me. And of course, Jill and the other folks on the committee have a copy as well. And I thank you all for your time.
Great, thank you, Sean. We will be sharing out the slides in a follow-up. Next up, I want to invite Reverend Erica Richmond to unmute. Reverend Erica is a local Unitarian Universalist minister serving at the First Parish Congregation of Arlington. She joined them in August of 2020, and since then has overseen and supported their social and racial justice efforts. Prior to serving in congregations, Reverend Erica served as a palliative care chaplain in Hartford and Seattle. As a white queer minister, she has served on the boards of Showing Up for Racial Justice, the LGBTQ Commission in Hartford, Center, which is Race and Equity in Education, and the Arlington Police Chiefs Advisory Committee. She loves all things New England, including our sports teams. Go Celtics. So Reverend Erica, if you want to join us.
Thanks, Jill, and thanks for the enthusiasm behind the Celtics plug. So hi, everyone. I'm Reverend Erica. I am honored to present on behalf of a lot of people at my congregation. You'll see on this very first slide that there is a team of parishioners at First Parish Arlington who has been doing this work. Their names are listed at the bottom, and I'm doing this humbly on behalf of them, and I hope I do well by them. So next slide. Oh, Jill, I had updated the slides. Did it not?
No. Let me go back. Okay, time out, pause.
Sorry. They're in your in the Google slide, like the link you had sent in the chat is the right version.
Okay. Let me see. Sorry, everyone. Okay. Should be able to. Okay, one moment. Okay, take two.
Take two, thanks.
Is this right?
That's perfect. Sorry about that. So still go Celtics. And First Parish is a Unitarian Universalist congregation. We're steeped in liberal religious tradition. For those who don't know about Unitarian Universalists, we're came out of the Christian tradition. Many of the first parishes, you might have one in your town, were the original houses of public worship for towns. And so, as Sean mentioned, taxpayers' money was forced to go into those public houses of worship. And if you see a first parish, that's because it was the first congregation of that established town. So our history is about 300 years old. Since that time, we've had a huge shift theologically. We came out of the Christian tradition, and today we're very theologically left, which is to say some of our folks believe in God, some are atheists, and we have a deep tradition of social advocacy. Our Racial Justice Coordinating Committee began in 2016. And they've done lots of different types of initiatives. So this group has led projects around looking at whiteness, white fragility, privilege, microaggressions. In 2020, we started talking more about policing. And in the past few years, we've been talking more about slavery and reparations. Next slide. So as the Racial Justice Coordinating Committee leads us in this work, we try to look at it at many levels. So it's the personal and interpersonal. How does white supremacy show up in those of us who are white? How does it impact people of color? How does it impact our personal relationships, whether that's family, collegial, in faith communities? And then how can we make shifts around white supremacy and racism within cultural frameworks? And now we've been looking institutionally. So how can our institutions respond to the call of reparations and looking honestly at our history? So moving from the personal and the interpersonal to the cultural to the institutional, while not forgetting about any of those parts as we move through this work. Next slide. Sean set me up so perfectly by talking about Theodore Parker. He is a Unitarian minister who was a renowned abolitionist who also had some white supremacist tendencies, and that both and of having folks who have abolitionist voices and activism alongside internalized racism or supremacy, patriarchy, heterosexism. There's the both and reality, and that's true in our specific congregation too. So we, in our research, have discovered that there are folks in our original community that were enslavers, and we also know that there have been people who have fought against the supremacies of any given day or decade. So as we do this work, we're trying to hold those two truths at once. Next slide. So this past summer, we did sort of a dive into that research. I've preached twice about it this year. We're a congregation of 450 adult members, so we're pretty big, and being able to spread some of this history to our membership has been really important and a huge learning for all of us. As Jill said at the beginning, sitting in discomfort and not expecting or rushing conclusions has been one of our learnings. But part of what we discovered was there were 17 founding members, which is to say they purchased pew boxes. You might see in the Old North Church in Boston, there are old pew boxes that you could shut the door to. And if you were wealthy and of means, if you were white, you could buy those pews, and those would be specifically for your family or those you invited in. So there were 17 folks who bought pews in our original building built in 1734. And of those 17 pew owners, many of them were enslavers or became enslavers in the subsequent years. Next slide. So like I said, it was built in 1734. This was the town house of worship. So it would have been funded in part by taxes in the local area, then called monodemy. And then it was also financed by monies from independent members, and that was through the sale of these pew boxes. So you'll see the original pew holders are listed here. And those who are underlined in red had a history of they themselves or their family enslaving Africans. And you can see it's about half, and that's a pretty startling thing to sit with for those of us who have had a mythology that couldn't be in our own backyard. So looking into more closely who these men were and who were their complicit wives in these atrocities was part of this work. Next slide, please. So after discovering those names and some of the people they enslaved in their houses, we continued to do some work and research. About 30 folks from First Parish participated in a 4-part series this past fall. We visited the Jason Russell House. If you've been to Arlington, you know it's an esteemed historic site and museum. They too are doing some of this good work and have been highlighting the fact that Kate was an enslaved woman there. The records show that she was gifted, that's the language of the time, to Jason Russell when she was only 3 months old, which brings up questions of who was caring for her. Were there other enslaved people in the house? And questions like that. So the Jason Russell House is trying to highlight the fact that Kate lived there and had forced labor there. We've done 4 viewings of Traces of the Trade. That was brought up at the beginning with that triangle trade map of looking at how Rhode Island was complicit in that and was in fact one of the largest economies for trading human beings in US history. And then in Arlington's old burying ground, which is right next to our congregation, we share a wall. It is said to be that there is an unmarked mass grave there, and that includes British soldiers that were killed on April 19th during Lexington and Concord battles, and also is rumored to include enslaved and freed Blacks. So in that unmarked grave are stories we don't know, but are hoping will be revealed. Next slide, please. So if you're interested, you can, all of the congregational records for my congregation in Arlington are digitized and scanned and are free and accessible at the Harvard Divinity Library website. It's pretty heart-wrenching to go through it and also pretty revealing. So on the lower right-hand corner, you'll see that is handwritten notes by Reverend Samuel Cook, who was the very first installed minister at First Parish Arlington. And he kept meticulous notes of who he baptized, who he married, and who died while he was serving this congregation. And you can, it's hard to read, but in the lower half of this screenshot, you'll see, you can make out Kate's name on March 17th, 1754, that Kate was a gift to Jason Russell, and you can see that written. Again, you'll have the slides later. I think someone said in the chat that it's a conversation to be had of how white supremacy and Christianity were mixing together. What does it mean that enslaved people were baptized? Was that a forced conversion? Was that a signal of their enslavers' understanding of their humanity? Or was it a way to continue oppression? I think that's a conversation we need to keep having. Next slide, please. This just is a summary of what I just said. There's several folks who were enslaved that we have seen in the mentioned in the congregational records. Rose was enslaved by William Cutler. William Cutler was one of those original pew owners. She was baptized in 1754. We also have note of when she married Punch, who was enslaved by Samuel Brooks. It's really about piecing together those congregational records and other historical records we have in town. Next slide, please. So Reckoning and Repair, about 20 folks from our congregation kind of carried forward this work after learning about all this research and talked about what it means in a spiritual community to both reckon and wrestle with this history and to seek reconciliation and repair and ultimately reparations. Next slide, please. So in thinking about reparations, there's the spiritual practice of kind of sitting with what feelings come up with from learning of these things, how not to be immobilized by it, to act from a place of honesty and momentum and repair rather than guilt and shame that freezes us. There's the power of truth telling, which is what we've been focusing on this year, of naming this history, of not denying it. And then moving towards what does wealth return look like? And Sean did a great job of some of those examples, as well as, I think, what does it mean for money to move from our church to those folks who are living in Arlington who are African American. Next slide, please. So again, these slides will be sent around to you, but you can see this affirmation and commitment that the Reckoning Repair Group has adopted. They'll be bringing this to the congregation for all of them to discuss and ultimately vote on, of how we as a congregation can kind of take this on an institutional level and commit to reparations. And you'll see in the commitment language an acknowledgement that reparations, that kind of wealth movement is a major part and a needed part of any repair work that will be done. Next slide, please. So there's several events. I hope when you get the slides, you'll join us for some of them. The Arlington Historical Society on Juneteenth this year is installing a stone at the unmarked graves in the old burying ground that has historical but also spiritual significance as we think of the surrounding tombstones in that graveyard, which are a lot of ministers and founding pew owners of our congregation and who has been unmarked, unrecognized, and dishonored for the past 300 years. So for me, that installation of a stone is a significant shift, and not a reparations, but certainly a movement in the right direction as we think of the importance of truth telling and naming. Next slide, please. These are some of our goals. You'll see that continuing to work with the Mystic Valley branch of the NAACP is one of them. Being with all of you here tonight is part of that. And I think there's one more slide of, yeah. So I'll do a plug for white folks who are on this call, contributing as we learned tonight, putting our money where our mouth is, and I'll plug donating to the Mystic Valley NAACP. Thanks, Jill.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the original slideshow. So just bear with me for a second, folks. Okay, and then next up, we are going to have Repair America Collective, which is a collective of grassroots community organizers founded in 2022, whose co-founders led the city of Boston and Cambridge to successfully pass reparation policies within their cities. During their presentation, they will be explaining what reparations means, examples, and how to get active immediately. So let me pull that up. Okay. And I will ask Saskia to join us, and then you can also, I don't know the speaking order, so feel free to chime in.
Okay, we'll give you cues, Jill. Thank you so much. And if you could just go right to the next slide, that would be perfect. Thank you everybody for joining us for this evening. And I'm just going to share with you our mission statement. So we are a collective of grassroots community organizers, and we're moving in solidarity for intersectional healing. Our mission is to repair harm in our communities by elevating consciousness of humanity through learning, sharing, healing, and celebrating. Our approach is developed through 4 pillars: learning, sharing, healing, and celebrating. And in each area, we develop reparatory plans that employ holistic models of repair through community engagement. So at Repair America Collective, we do not push race-based ideologies. We want to celebrate and recognize all of humanity and repair harms, specifically to those who are descendants of chattel slavery here in the US. I'm a co-founder, and I'm gonna pass this over to Aziza Robertson Goodnight, our other co-founder. And Jill, can you just go to the next slide, please?
Hi.
Thank you. Aziza, you can take it away.
Thank you, Saskia. At Repair America Collective, we are really proud of partnerships and would love to create more partnerships, but we have a list of partnerships here that we're excited about. Liberation Ventures, which we are a member of the cohort of a group of national organizers, and we attend conferences with that cohort and also do learning and shared resources. Accomplice is our fiscal sponsor. Radical Black Girl has been working on all of our marketing and media, which you see right now, and also working on a curriculum to teach about what is reparations. MIT Collab, we are in a 30-month partnership with MIT Collab, working on a research project and a few other deliverables. The Goodnight Initiative, to lead in thinking about our creative organizing. Mass Recreational Consumer Council, which is our first partner and anchor sponsor, and BU Anti-Racist Advocacy Center we're working with, and my partnership I'm most excited about is our Get Busy Youth. To become a partner today, you can email us at repairamericcollective@gmail.com. I'd like for you to put up the next slide, and I'd like to pass it to the founder of Get Busy Youth, Jalen.
Hi everyone, hope you can hear me. So the revolutionaries, the revolution has always been in the hands of the young inherit the revolution by Huey P. Newton. And the revolutionaries are a group of young people that work collectively with the understanding of an inheritance of the revolution. Next slide, please. Thank you. What is reparations according to the international law by the United Nations? So we've been following this model according to the United Nations, is secession assurances guaranteed of non-repetition, restitution, and repatriation, and compensation, and rehabilitation, and satisfaction. That is what reparations is according to the United Nations under international law. Next slide, please. What is secession assurances and guarantees of non-repetition? Meaning and definition. Under the international law, a state responsible for wrongfully inquiring a people is undering an obligation to A, seize the act if it's continuing, and B, if offering appropriate assurances and guarantees of non-repetition. Historical example, Families United, Native Americans have sovereignty and govern as their tribe. And for example, we as American freedmen, we do not have our sovereignty. We are not at liberty to govern ourselves. So I'll have to take this over to my comrade, Calvin. Is Calvin here? Saskia?
Yes, I believe Calvin is here. He was just on. Hold on. Calvin, can you unmute yourself?
Okay, now I can unmute myself. Hello, thank you, Sister Jalen, for the introduction. Hello.
Can we have next slide, please?
Oh, yes. And Calvin, can you unmute yourself again?
Okay. Just so you guys know, it's saying that the host is not allowing us to speak. So just for clarity. Okay.
We can hear you now.
Awesome. Okay, next, are we on the current slide? Sorry, that kind of,
yes.
Okay.
This is the slide.
Okay, let me just make sure I can see. Okay, awesome. Hello all. Thank you, Sister Jalen, for the introduction. I will be speaking on what is restitution and repatriation, meaning and definition. Restitution means to reestablish the situation which existed before the wrongful act was committed. An historical example would be the Mississippi Wampanoag tribe receiving over 300 acres in land trust by President Obama. This is a very recent one. Next slide, please. And I also would like to say that the sources are at the bottom, and I'm sure we can give them to you after. What is compensation? Meaning and definition, payment and economic opportunities in lieu of service. An historical example, California Task Force supports direct cash payments as compensation for Black American descendants of chattel slavery in the US. Next slide, please. What is rehabilitation? Meaning/definition. Shall be provided to include legal, medical, psychological, cultural, educational, and other cares of service. Historical example is the Jewish Memorial Hospital and Rehabilitation Centers that you see in Roxbury, Mass. Next slide, please. Satisfaction. What is satisfaction? I'm sorry, I don't believe this is my slide. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble.
Can you read it, Calvin?
Yeah, of course. Okay.
It's okay. You can read it and then just pass it to Aziza.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Saskia. What is satisfaction? Meaning/definition. Satisfaction is part of full reparations under international law for moral damage, such as emotional injury, mental suffering, and injury to reputation. In some instances where cessation, restitution, and compensation do not bring full repair. Satisfaction is also needed. Apologies falls under the reparative category of satisfaction. A historical example of this would be Boston was the first city to issue an apology to Black Americans that are descendants of chattel slavery within the US. This source is also under, and I would like to go to the next slide and pass this off to Aziza for the will of repair. Thank you.
Thank you, Calvin. Our revolutionaries are amazing, and we like to let them lead in the work. Right here is just a tool that was created by the African American Redress Network and the Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center out of Howard University School of Law. It is a tool that they shared with us during the 2022 National Reparations Conference in DC. It was a tool designed for individuals and community members to identify their harm and create solutions from them. This is broken down into the 5 harm areas that NCOBRA has defined. Those harm areas are personhood repair, health repair, education repair, justice repair, and wealth repair. Those categories are also broken down into 5 more categories, so allowing for a visual representation of 25 categories that folks can think about with community or individually or as families to think about repair. We are working directly with Billy Wilkerson, who is from the Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center, in creating a curriculum for communities around the will of repair, and also with MIT Collab to create some tool or toolkit that communities can use and to envision to identify their harm and envision repair. Thank you. Next slide, and I'd like to pass on to Ernest.
Thank you, Saskia. Here's our calendar for the 2023 year. On June 4th, we're at the Dorchester Day Parade. June 3rd, Pride Parade in Boston. June 24th, we're at BAMFest. July 16th, Roxbury Day Parade. August 19th, Caribbean Festival. Next slide, please. Here's how you can take action with us. Have a skill, able to pass out flyers, ready to walk in parade? Join us at hitting it. You can hit the link, the bit.ly link at Reparations Volunteer, or contacting us at RepairAmericaCollective.org. Next slide, please. Here's more contact information. Repair with us. Join us every Tuesday at 6 p.m. virtually, clicking the bit.ly link right there, or in person at the Democracy Center, Cambridge. Also hitting the bit.ly link will take you right to the location. Next slide, please. I would like to pass the mic back to Saskia.
Thank you so much, Ernest. And on this closing page, we have a quote by Bernice King, and it reads, "I do not want to be people of color. Erasure of culture and identity is not love." And so we close on this statement to help really capture the fact that Black is not a monolith. We have culture that we need to recognize. We're calling on all of you that are in attendance today to walk forward in your anti-racism practices and to stop identifying people by skin color and to start acknowledge people by their heritage. Reparations needs to be a lineage-based claim. It cannot be race-based. This is against the 14th Amendment that does not allow that. And so when you join us in Action Hour, we've dropped the links below. We're going to be supporting a truth and reconciliation process on a municipal level policy and on a state level truth and reconciliation as well too. As part of the process. It's important that you recognize that all Black Americans that are descendants of chattel slavery, as part of this process for reparations, we want a state office of Freedmen Affairs. We want to bring back the Freedmen's Bureau on a federal level to service our community. Just like the Native American office, we need the Native American bureaus, we need a Freedmen's Bureau, we need a state Freedmen's office, we need regional offices. Families need assistance tracing their lineage, finding family members, disbursements of any payments and grants and things that will be allocated. All of this we need an office to deal with all of these type of programs and such. So we call on you to support us in these efforts and to join us in any way possible that you're able to through the links below. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. So we will be doing Q&A in a few more minutes. We have one more presentation. We're a little behind schedule, so I hope folks can stick around. Let's see. And then our last presenter right now is going to be Jane Appleyard-Allen, who is a public health professional who considers racism a public health crisis. She's a facilitator of several racial justice workshops, including White People Challenging Racism, Moving from Talk to Action, and RTI, International's Forum on Racial Equity. Jane is a member of the community group Fighting for Black Lives in our neighborhood, which is working on a project called Reparations for Melrose. So Jane, I will ask you to unmute and I will put your slides up.
Thank you so much, Jill. I probably should have started to ask you this before you introduced me, but in the interest of everyone's experience, would it be better if I wait until next time to present and let you have a few minutes for questions for the presenters that have gone before me? I know you mentioned that you might have other events in the future, so I just want to make that offer to step aside so that there can be time for questions.
That's a great question. I honestly would put it back to our creators of the program. I think if folks are interested, we can extend by another like 10 minutes to allow for some more Q&A. And again, it'll be recorded and we'll send that follow-up. So if folks have to drop off, we'll surely be sending out everything. But you've been with us this far. I'd say I would love for you to be able to present your piece. Anyone oppose? I think we're good. Go for it.
Okay. Thank you so much. I am grateful to you. I'm very excited to be here. in this group talking about this important topic. So again, my name is Jane Allen, representing the group Reparations for Melrose. And as you can see, the redlining map is on the screen in front of you, and you can see the enormous privilege we have here in Melrose. There were no red lines in Melrose. We were the beneficiaries of the racist housing policies that Sean spoke of earlier. So next slide. Reparations for Melrose is a group that is focused on ending anti-Black racism. And our focus has been conducting research and documenting harms in our city so that we can advocate for racial equity and make the case for reparative justice. Next slide, please. So I'll just start by saying we had the opportunity to have Saskia come and visit our group about a year ago, and we found her guidance incredibly helpful. Talking to her, we had already started documenting harms and preparing some reports. But talking to her was a good reminder that we didn't want to spend all of our time meticulously documenting, and that the research and the reports were a way to open discussions in the community and to hold elected officials accountable and to pave the way for reparative justice. So we have continued our working on reports, but with Saskia's guidance, shifted our focus a little bit. And so, for example, we have several city elections coming up in Melrose soon, and we are planning to have a forum, which is something we've done in the past, where we ask all the candidates where they stand on issues that come up in these reports. So we've developed reports in each of these areas that you see on the slide over the last 18 months. And I won't take long, but I just want to share a few highlights from the reports to spark the thinking of the attendees here tonight about research that you might do in your own community, because all of our data are, almost all of our data are publicly available, and we would be very happy to help you find the data and do the kinds of analyses we've done so that you can understand the situation in your own community. Next slide. So before I go further, I just want to say that Melrose is a city that I think doesn't perceive itself as having a problem with anti-Black systemic racism. Our motto is one community open to all. We have a Human Rights Commission. We have a DEI committee. We celebrate Juneteenth, as well as Pride and kindness. And sometimes I think those wonderful things that we do prevent us from seeing and acknowledging our history and the racial injustice that exists today in our community. So that is a barrier that we face in our work. Next slide. This is a figure from one of our education reports, and it shows that the rate of exclusionary school discipline has been higher among Black students relative to white students in every year from 2012 through 2021. And you can see the red line is Black student discipline, and the blue line is white student discipline. And so you probably know disciplinary actions such as suspension and expulsion have many negative effects, including causing students to fall behind academically. It's associated with higher rates of dropout and other long-term outcomes, including greater likelihood of involvement in the legal system. So, and by the way, I didn't have a chance to add the data point from the last school year, but in the last school year, 2021 to 2022, Black students were disciplined at 12 times the rate of white students in Melrose. So these are state data. We have a tutorial on how to use them, how to download the data, how to run the kinds of analyses we've run. You can get in touch with us if you would like to look at your own city. Next slide. This figure shows how Melrose compares with 12 neighboring communities in terms of the average rate at which schools discipline Black students relative to white students. And some people have pushed back on us occasionally about small sample sizes. They say, well, these sample sizes are so tiny you can't really say anything. So we combined data for the last decade of exclusionary school discipline in Melrose and in all of these communities, and took the average rate of inequity, and this is the result. So it shows that Melrose has disciplined Black students at 5 times the rate of white students over the past decade. We also have another education report that focuses on the racial composition of the teaching staff and other staff at the school. And it shows that last year, Black students in Melrose had no teachers that looked like them. And this is a loss for all students, but it's especially harmful for Black students because research shows that Black students who have teachers who look like them are more likely to thrive academically, more likely to graduate from high school, and more likely to aspire to college. So when we have lack of representation in the teaching staff, we know based on research that this is harmful to our Black students. Next slide, please. Another of our reports shows that in Melrose, Black homebuyers are 68% more likely to be denied a loan for a new home than white homebuyers. And as you can see, these data are quite recent. We saw an analysis like this in the Boston Globe, and we found the data. One of our members found the data, downloaded it from Melrose, and ran this. And as you can see, we have racial inequities even among homeowners. So it's not just excluding people from the community, it's preventing people from making the most of their home ownership, even once they are homeowners in our community. Black homeowners were 176 times more likely to be denied a home improvement loan, 147% more likely to be denied in refinancing their mortgage, and 63% more likely to be denied cash out mortgage refinancing. Next slide. This figure I wanted to show you just because it illustrates so well the first bullet point on the previous slide that shows that Black homebuyers were denied mortgages at substantially higher rates than people of all other races in Melrose from 2007 to 2021. Next slide. So one member of our team downloaded and analyzed all the police logs in Melrose over the past 20 years. That analysis shows that since the murder of George Floyd, there's been an increase in the number of police reports that do not identify the race of the person arrested. The records increasingly say race unknown. So we have more work to do to understand what's going on here, but it concerns us and it's something that we're keeping an eye on. Next slide. In 2022, Melrose conducted a racial climate survey, which showed that relative to white people, Black people have greater discomfort interacting with city institutions, especially City Hall and the school system and the housing authority. You can see the blue bar here is our Black residents and the gray bar is our white residents. And this is a assessment of discomfort. So the city reported back to us on this survey, but didn't mention any racial inequities. So we felt it was important to produce our own report based on these publicly available data, and it is on our website. Next slide. This is the last study I'll highlight. We produced a brief report on colorblindness because in the racial climate survey, we noticed that a substantial proportion of respondents declined to provide their race, and yet their data looked very similar to white people in a lot of ways. That made us curious. We dug a little deeper, and we found that most people who didn't report their race said that they thought racism is not a concern in Melrose, and that they do not want the city to address concerns related to DEI. And by the way, in this regard, they did not look like most white people in Melrose. Most white people said racism is an issue, a problem, and that they want something to be done about it. But these people looked like white people in terms of their comfort levels, but they don't want to talk about racism. They don't want to talk about DEI. They have among the strongest feelings of any group surveyed about racism, belonging, and in our view, appear to be engaged in colorblindness. And this is our only report that doesn't focus on racial inequities, but we wanted to document this as a barrier to what we face in terms of getting people to acknowledge the past and current harms that in our community and to shift people toward reparative justice. Next slide. So that's it for me. Basically, please be in touch if you would like to talk with me or anybody on our team about where we found the data. They're all publicly available state level data, municipal level data available through, to you, I believe, except for the racial climate survey, which was specific to Melrose. We'll show you how we did our analyses. We created a video tutorial teaching you how to use the data. And we'd love to learn from you as well about the kind of things you might be finding. So please do be in touch. And next slide is my last slide, just to give you our contact information. We do have a website. It's in development, and you'll see it there if you go to reparationsformelrose.org. The reports aren't all there yet, but they will be soon. Thank you so much. And thank you to the other presenters. I appreciated so much getting the opportunity to learn from you tonight.
Great, thank you so much, Jane. And thank you to everyone for tuning in and to all of our panelists. So I will be sharing, we'll have a feedback form for folks. I'm gonna actually stop sharing so I can see everyone. I'm gonna share a feedback form, and we are gonna move into Q&A. Let me see. As of right now, there were no questions except will the presentation be shared? And that is a yes, but I'd like to take a moment. If folks do have questions, feel free to put it in the chat or use the reaction option at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand, and we'll call on you to ask your question. Antonia, let me see if I can unmute you. Okay, yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to thank you so much for this presentation and the invite. I thought it was an awesome presentation of the racism that has historically existed in Massachusetts. Massachusetts really doesn't get a lot of support as far as reparations, and it's also the historical context of the harms that have been done to our people here. It is touted the most racist state in the nation. And I know there's a lot of people who support and are allies that would love to help fight the cause. I just want to make one statement, if I can, so that we can really get to the heart of getting reparations and understanding the lineage. When Saskia and Aziza, they work for Reparation America Collective, I work with them. We have done some remarkable things, and I take my hats off to both of them. It's really important that we reference American freedmen as being the context of the lineage base. American freedmen represents the 4 million emancipated slaves. So when we're talking about the descendants of chattel slavery, we have to be really more specific about American freedmen. There was an American Freedmen Act of 1865. There was also an American Freedmen Bureau and American Freedmen Bank. All those things were put in place in 1865 when the emancipation became available. However, they were sabotaged and failed. And then another thing I want to add context to is, even though slavery was derived in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, a lot of the American freedmen flee to Massachusetts to escape racial terror. And I think that it's really important that we do that research on American freedmen, how we got here as being Blacks in Massachusetts, and also respect the name and the lineage. I think a lot of people say slaves, they say descendants of slaves, or they'll say Black people or Black enslaved or African slaves. We are American freedmen. As legislation and congressional documents, we have a American Freedmen Bill Act that was done of 1865. We had an American Freedmen Bureau, much like the Native Americans have the Bureau of Indian Affairs, that was failed and also sabotaged. And we had a bank that the money was pillaged and also money was stolen. So I think it's really, really important that we add that verbiage to any bills or any context of anything that we're speaking with regards to descendants of slaves. And I just want to say again, thank you so much for the remarkable presentation, and thank you for those who are wholeheartedly willing to dismantle the harms. You will never get rid of racism. You can't cure that. But I really feel like my heart felt for those who are here today who wanted you to work to, make things right. And so reparations is major. We're also working on the federal level. I work with a network, a group of grassroots organizations. I work closely with the California Task Force. And so it's important that we look at the whole broad picture. And I really want to take my hats off to Sean. He really recapitulated what happened in Massachusetts from day one. And I want to thank everybody again. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, Antonia. And the next hand we have is Carolyn Schwartz and then Maura Albert.
Thank you for a very helpful presentation. I would just like to understand more the concept of asking about lineage more than asking about race. I do medical research, and I systematically ask about race in our surveys because that's how we can understand disparities by race. And so I want to understand whether the suggestion in the presentation 2 presentations ago was to stop asking about race or to add more information about lineage, and if so, what that looks like. What does that mean? What are the options for asking that kind of question?
So, Jill, is it okay if I answer that one?
Yeah, I think it was directed to your group.
Okay. So why we're asking to focus lineage based is because it becomes more, you really start to see the truth once you start going lineage based. You're really starting to get some real deep numbers. An example of this is a lot of people know the infamous number of Black Bostonians having $8 of wealth versus the 247K, right? But when you look at the numbers even more, it's $8 of wealth to the American freedmen community, and then it's 12,000 to our Caribbean community. Now, both of these communities can identify as Black. Our Caribbean community, there's different ones, but that's a wide disparity model. If you go in the city of Boston and you look at quote unquote Black businesses, well, there's only like in the whole city, there's maybe 5 businesses that are owned by freedmen, but there are like hundreds that are owned by immigrants. Right. So we have to recognize that our Black immigrants have access to additional resources. There's immigrant loans and grants. And this is starting to come out from our immigrant community. They're going viral on like TikTok and other things, talking about how they're denied access to open up businesses in white communities, but they are allowed to open up businesses in Black communities. And so what we're witnessing is that a community that is already underfunded, dealing with institutional and systemic racism, where it's already underfunded, now immigrants are being pushed into this community and being allowed to profit off of the oppression of the freedmen communities. And so what we want to avoid is a pitting against our freedmen communities and our immigrant communities. This is wrong, what's happening. And so we need to stop creating this Black box, this Black lens, because you're putting all of us in one box and making us fight for all the resources within this box. And that's just not how policy works, you guys. So we have to really, really take a step back, and we have to acknowledge that we are upholding systemic racism, institutional racism. We need to acknowledge simple quotes like, you can never dismantle the master's house using the master's tools, right? So the same breath that you are recognizing people by their race, there's only one race, and that's the human race, right? So we should all be stepping out of this Black box and recognizing people by their heritage. And then recognizing that American freedmen, have a complex lineage where we are not only just descendants of people brought over on slave ships. We were here before Christopher Columbus. There were Black Indigenous people here as well too. We also had the recategorizing of Native Americans who were not white passing. They became recategorized as Negro by white supremacists. So we have a mixed lineage. We are indigenous here to Turtle Island, as well as on the continent of Africa. So our claim for land here is one that is based on sovereignty, and is one where we're calling that to stop withholding our homeland from us. This is our homeland. We are indigenous here to Turtle Island, as well as on the continent of Africa. This is a different conversation if you're coming from the Caribbean community or coming from the continent of Africa. So please do not flatten us all in that one breath, because we do not have relatives. A lot of us don't have relatives living in Nigeria or etc. We're here. This is where we have family in Tennessee or Alabama. This is how our lineage works. So we ask you to recognize that, but most importantly, also recognize that, again, the 14th Amendment, we cannot pass laws based upon race. We don't want to go backwards. We need to go forward. So we cannot base reparations upon race. We have to have freedmen, and then there can be immigrants. That's a separate conversation and involves a whole different, process and reports and all of that. So we have to really, really be mindful in these things.
Right, thank you, Saskia. Okay, Maura.
There we go. That was really my question, was the whole concept of identifying the erasure of culture and identity. And Saskia, is that how I pronounce her name? She did an excellent job of explaining that. Thank you so very much. What I'd like to ask, though, on top of that is, how do we go about educating people and making this better?
Educating people on asking about lineage or reparations?
Yes, about, okay. Yes. The difference between freedmen and immigrants, and how do we educate people and do something about it?
So we've actually asked you guys to join us in Action Hour. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're collectively writing the Truth and Reconciliation Task Force policy on a municipal level, and to be pushing that. We're also, there's multiple things that we're working on, and our young adults are working on as well too. We're going to be, we can work with you locally, doing public outreach and education on these areas, and there's different ways. There's visual, there's written ways as well too. So there's different ways you can get active with us. bit.ly/reparations volunteer is if you can just put in your skill area. Our young adults, we've been developing different ways to actually help do this. I don't want to go into specifics because it's a lot and we don't have a lot of time, but if you want to get busy, we have policy, we have conversations, we have written ways, to disseminate out information, coming up with pamphlets and flyers and visuals, all sorts of ways. So whichever way you have a skill, please share your skill with us so that we can amplify and really build, on the heritage conversation. It is extremely important, Mara, and it's one of the areas that we believe is weakest in this movement. We see it as being one of the weakest areas and needing to really, really strengthen that conversation. So for all of you that are happy to focus in on this area, our campaign is Where's Our 40 Acres and a Mule? Really talking about heritage, really coming in and drawing that connection between us and land, and why this land isn't just a wealth building model. Yes, of course, land is wealth building by colonial framework. However, this is our home. Why does 40 acres matter to us? Why do we want that? Why do we believe not to be spending $2 million to buy a house? What are you talking about buying back our homeland? How atrocious is this after extracting so much later? And now you think being fair is giving us access to loans. This is ridiculous. You should be signing over our homes to us. We're not going to be working for generations to pay off a home. So there's so many ways, Mara, I can't go into details, but there is so many ways you can get busy with us. And we would love, to work with you and anybody else that's here tonight.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I was going to say, we're 15 minutes over. So I do want to be respectful of folks' time, and thank you for staying on. And there's a lot of info getting added to the chat, but like I said, we'll be sending out follow-up. If you registered, you will receive an email probably at the end of the week. Things are a little crazy right now, but we'll be getting the video posted on the website and shared out as well. We do have a feedback form that we'd love. It's just 2 questions from folks to complete just to see how this went, and we're hoping to do more. And we'll include the resources, the slides, and the contact info for all of our presenters. And I think maybe with that, we might call it a night. I'm going to ask our reparations committee if there's anything else anyone from the committee would like to share. And I really appreciate all the hard work that went into this and everyone attending.
I just want to say, please fill out the form. Only take a minute and really will help us to plan for our next event.
Thanks, Robin. And Jennifer?
Yeah.
Oh, you're on mute, Jennifer.
I just wanted to thank all of our presenters and each of you who took time out this evening to be here and to, hear our presenters and to start really thinking more about how we can be actively involved in this movement. Thank you so much. Learned so much.
Thank you. And Arga?
Thank you, everyone, for making this evening what it is and what it was. And we would love to do it again. And also, let's think about decolonizing our curricula so that we can be learning the true history of all of us and finding connections. Reparations and these terms that we're learning is really huge. And I want to thank everyone on the panel for joining us this evening. Let the education continue. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great night and join the NAACP. Become a member.
Yes, please. We also have our youth. Yes, we have our youth committee starting up as well. So if you know youth and you're in the education field, please send them our way.
Okay.
Thank you, President Harvey.
No problem. I'm going to stop the recording.